So welcome everyone to the APEN webinar for February 2022. At this webinar, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Warwick Waters. Warwick was one of the joint recipients of our Excellence in Extension Award for 2022. He is a program manager for Cotton Info and responsible for coordinating the activities of extension specialists and technical experts to connect the cotton industry with research. Now, for the past 7 years, Warwick has led the team and its work to deliver major initiatives, including delivery of extension campaigns around water use efficiency, nutrient management, and integrated pest management. I'd like to welcome Warwick without any further ado. Warwick, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Graham. Look, just before I start, I hope to be a little bit interactive in what we do here. If you have your phones available, I'm actually going to have a couple of QR codes which will give you access to secret information. So things that aren't readily accessible, that as a participant, you'll get a chance to have a look at if you choose to. So have your phones ready for when those QR codes come up. And look, back last century, when I was learning a lot of my extension practice, I had a session with Ruth Nettle and Mark Payne about organising extension for farming systems. And one of their tips was, for any activity, always start with your purpose, what the process is going to be for achieving that purpose, and then your program, thirdly. So I've just been thinking about what the purpose of this next little session is. And what I've decided on is to try and share some tips and lessons from my experience in extension. Not to give you answers, but to more encourage you to ask questions, question your current practice, and question opportunities for yourself. As mentioned, I'll share a couple of resources which aren't readily available. And I want to invite you to see if there's interest in engaging around 3 future opportunities that I see in extension. So that'll be the purpose that I'll run through here now. So the elaboration likelihood model would suggest that you'll be trying to work out whether I'm a credible source of information worth listening to based on 3 main factors. So you'll be thinking about the education that I've had, the organisation that I work for, and the experience that I've had, amongst a few other things. So just to help you in gauging whether I'm credible or not, I'll start with a little bit of experience. And Ro, are you able to share, say, the 3rd slide? We'll just see if this works or not. So when I first graduated and started working, as I said, last century, I was actually a little bit popular in the workplace that I first started with, which was Queensland DPI, because I had a couple of skills that were deemed to be valuable. So at university, I had a little bit of experience with a program called WordPerfect. So I was able to help people do basic stuff around setting up a document and using this newfangled thing called word processing. And I also had a little bit of knowledge about basic DOS commands. So I was able to help people find files on floppy disks. And when I started, it was the orange ones that were, I think, in vogue at that moment. The blue ones hadn't even come along when I first kicked off. So had a couple of little successes, but it wasn't long before I was released out into my own district and Roy, we might stop sharing if that's okay. I don't want to have too much of the screen. There we go. Released out as a dairy husbandry officer with my own region, and released to go off and start making my own mistakes, which I did quite successfully for a while. So just to give me a bit of a feel for the audience in the room and the sort of mistakes that I might talk about, Ro, can we try the polling question 1 and see if that works? Well, yeah, maybe I'll try it. Can you see that polling question?
Not yet. Up, it's there now.
Let's give people a minute to fill that in.
You're sharing results at the moment, Warwick. So we probably need to.
So that hasn't worked?
Now it has. Yes.
So I'm guided by you as to whether you've got something to input there.
We do, Warwick. We've got all the questions. Did you want us to answer them all?
I didn't actually.
It's okay. Just answer one.
Just answer number 1 at the moment.
Oh, I don't think it lets us submit. I think they're all coming up.
Okay.
That'll be a point. Yep.
All right. Well, I might actually hold off on my polling questions for a little while then, and just fumble along in the dark. So first mistake to talk about was I'd been in my job for a couple of years and was starting to get to know the dairy farmers around the Gympie region where I was based. And so they're a pretty tight-knit group of farmers, and one of the things that they would have every year was a regional Christmas party. And went along to this Christmas party, and it was obviously December, summer, and just prior to that, I'd been discussing with the board of the farmer group that I was working with about the issue of resistance in ticks, and how if we're able to collect samples of ticks from around the region, we could get a handle on whether we were getting resistance in our area and whether we needed to respond with a different treatment type. Anyway, one of the board comes over halfway through the Christmas party and says, look, we're not going to get a chance to be able to get feedback from people or get stuff out before Christmas, and then it's going to be too late. And look, we've got everyone in the room here together. How about you jump up and do your little talk on ticks and use this opportunity to be able to get the message across, and we can get a response. I sort of okay, well, logically it is the right time to be sharing this information, and yes, there's the opportunity to do it here. Everyone's in the room. So I got up and I told the room how important understanding resistance to ticks were, and that they had an opportunity to be able to collect ticks over the next few weeks and send them in, and we could get them checked. So I see Jeff's on, and so I'll talk about my monitoring and evaluation feedback, which I got as soon as I got back to the table of farmers that I was sitting with, who very clearly informed me that talking about ticks at their Christmas party was not what they'd come along for. And they didn't really appreciate having their Christmas party hijacked by something like that. And look, it's one of the things that for years I've felt embarrassment about. And I'd wake up at night sometimes thinking, what an idiot. Why did I do that? What I would do differently if I had that over it again. And I share that story just to emphasize the significance of the fear of social embarrassment. And as extension officers, the trust that people need to put in us when we're running something in a social setting with multiple people. So I looked up basic fears of mankind, and the top two were extinction or dying, and the second one was loss of relationship or social embarrassment. So it's up there with it's one of the two big fears that we have. And I just encourage people to be very careful about that responsibility that they have in an extension situation. That doesn't mean, though, that our activities, they need to be safe, but they don't necessarily have to be comfortable. And that's our challenge, is to walk this path between having a safe environment and a comfortable environment. And if I think of one of my most uncomfortable situations, sorry, Jeff, I did quite a few REC courses, and I still distinctly remember going along to Jeff's evaluation training. And we turned up on the first day, and we got about 30 of us extension people in the room, country people. And Jeff and Jessica Dart was there as well. Jeff says, oh, the first thing we're going to do is listen to a song. And he starts playing Fatboy Slim, Rockefeller Strut. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Fatboy Slim. I can remember every word of the song even still, because it's only got a few. Right about now, The Funk's Your Brother. And that basically repeats for 7 minutes-ish. And there's a period of about 5 minutes where it actually winds right down and you think it's dead. And then it kicks off again and it goes for another 2 or 3 minutes. And I remember the palpable discomfort in the room as people sat through listening to that song. But the purpose was, it was, I think, the #1 song at the time, and Jeff wanted us to evaluate the song and work out, how do we work out what value that song had. So lesson 1, safe but challenging environments. It's interesting, back in my extension days, we're also promoting increased nitrogen use on pastures, and our target was to get people to use 600 units of N per hectare over summer. If you combined in winter as well, we're probably up to about 900 units of N. So for those not familiar with fertilizer rates, double that for urea. So that's a couple of tons of urea per hectare that we were trying to get behaviour change towards. In my current job, we're working hard to pull back fertilizer application from about 350 to 250 units of N. Just didn't regard all of the environmental, climate impacts of those practices back then. That wasn't part of our thinking. So just with our polls, if people want to turn their cameras on, we'll just do this by raising hands. I'll just ask questions. So a big part of what we did in Dairy Extension was to run discussion groups. And for those of you who are in the APEN conference, you would have heard Tom from Ireland talking about the value of discussion groups. And I'm just interested to get a sense of how many people in the room have found discussion groups to be a useful tool for extension and behaviour change. So hands up if discussion groups have worked for you. Very good. Okay, hands down. So I'm curious now as to how many people are involved in a discussion group yourselves to improve your own professional capacity and use that as a tool yourselves. Show of hands. Oh, there's a few, which is good. So that's something that I would encourage you to think about. The same mechanisms and tools that we look to engage with our farmers and producers, to reflect back and see whether they might be useful for us as well. And I'd encourage people to consider the value of that and maybe take the opportunities through APEN, through regional clusters and those sort of things, or just by pulling together a group of your peers that might be contextually relevant to get the same benefit that we see growers and farmers getting from discussion groups. Okay, moving on, because my time's running out and I want to leave some time for discussion. Some of the mistakes that I've made with my more current job or the role in Cotton Info was that when we first started out, we didn't have a really good or a well-defined extension planning framework. And I was relying on the professional training and experience of my staff to be able to identify and prioritize activities and programs that we were going to roll out, and found it took me about 18 months to 2 years to work out that we really need to have an agreed framework that we run through together to be able to plan our activities. So I've got to thank Sean Kenny for the input that he had with our team, coming up with a 5-step process which involves getting a good problem or opportunity definition to start with, to look at definitions of poor practice and good practice, so a spectrum of practice within the area that we were looking at, to then consider the distribution uniformity of the target audience that we're working with. Are most people down the poor end? Are they at the good end? And how does that influence how we engage and what we engage about? The fourth thing was to make sure that we've got good measures and matrix to be able to know what we're dealing with and to tell whether anything's happened. And the fifth one was to do a service scan. So to consider who else is operating in this space that we might either be able to coordinate and work with, or who might be providing conflicting information that we need to take into account. So that was another mistake. Another one was that it took a little while before we got good role descriptions within our team. And it was very handy when we tightened those up and considered what people's jobs were and the boundaries around those, which also created a much better focus for us developing people's capacity and thinking about, well, how do they need to be improved? Look, one of the key things that I've learned in relation to engaging around that development of people, both of staff and of growers, is the importance of understanding the implication of their level of skills acquisition. So something I picked up from my time in New Zealand was a course that they ran within ag research called Eye to Eye. And one of the key tools that I've picked up and used ever since is the Dreyfus model of skills acquisition. And I'd encourage people to have a look at that to get an understanding of the different way that you might engage with people depending on their level of skills acquisition. And I'm not sure if you can share the screen, Ro, and bring up slide 6. But on there's a QR code that'll give you access to an unrefereed document that I've written about the application of skills acquisition to cotton extension. It was one that I wrote for a conference and never progressed through to getting it published. I'd be happy to have any feedback from people as to whether they think it's useful or whether they question some of the assumptions in the paper. But there it is for you to have a look at. If you just follow that QR code, it should give you the link to be able to access that document. Thanks, Ro. We'll turn that off, and I think people can access and just fast forward recording later on if they want to re-engage with these things. All my time is flying away. So just a few things that are working well before I get to the 3 opportunities. So within Cotton Info, the partnership model is great. We are an organisation that includes an RDC, the farmers policy body in Cotton Australia, and a private company in CSD. And having those different groups come together is great. Our extension program is funded long-term so that we don't have 3-year rolling contracts. People are permanently employed, and the minimum time that people will know that the program is pulling up is about 5 years. So we've got stability in the people that we have and to be able to plan to go forward. And that also enables us to develop people as well over a longer period of time, and for them to keep focus on the project. In a 3-year project, first year, you're trying to get your head around what's going on. Second year might be productive. Third year, you're looking for your next thing. Supporting research connection with growers is something that's working really well. Having our technical leads who have a role of networking with researchers in projects is great. And also just the importance of complementary players. So for us, that's people like the Crop Consultants Association, which is an association of agronomists or consultants who are about building capacity of them in the program. We work closely and well with them. We've got the Australian Association of Cotton Scientists. They're running monthly webinars about stuff that they're finding that's interesting, and we can support and learn from them. And we've got various other extension teams within the industry, like CSD's E&D team and Cotton Australia regional managers. So working collaboratively across those partners is great. Okay, so moving on now to 3 opportunities that I see for extension going forward. And I've got a great picture of my team there, which I might flick up at the end just so that you know who've helped me to be able to do any good that has been done in the last 7 years. Okay, so 3 things that I want to talk about as far as opportunities. The first one is about better understanding and applying adoption pathways within research projects. So that's about engaging with projects early and considering the adoption and impact aspects of those projects and supporting them to be as effective as possible. So that raises questions about, well, is that engagement, is a process and a framework that is applied? Is it a set of skills that is required for that to happen well? Is it a support service for those projects to be able to effectively negotiate that pathway of adoption and impact? So there's a cross-RDC project which is being led by Hort Innovation at the moment, but it's got 8 RDCs and New South Wales DPI, which is looking into this question with phase 1, which is about working out what does a good intervention look like, and then phase 2 will be applying that over 3 years with a range of projects to do some action learning. This is not the only project in this space either. There's other organisations which are considering similar questions, and if you're interested in this, first invitation is to reach out and either express interest in following what's going on with the cross-RDC one, or to have some input from your own perspective that we might be able to work out together. The second area is around the application of systems thinking. And so something that I've been wrestling with for a while is just trying to understand the implications of understanding and applying systems auditedness. So the common terms that are used are things like what's a simple system, a complicated system, a complex or a chaotic system. And my observation is that I think the reality is that most systems we work with are complex, which has a certain way of, or opportunities of engaging with it. But the way that we actually treat most projects, systems is complicated. And we tend to think that they can be broken down into components, look for efficiency gains from a component point of view, that we can actually establish cause and effect for dealing with those systems, which is a fairly fundamental research paradigm. So if anyone's interested in the opportunities and impact of systems thinking, I'd encourage you to have a look at the work of Craven. So he is based in Canberra at the moment, but has done some really interesting work around food security and availability and the systems impact of that. He's currently working on developing resilience in communities and doing some really interesting stuff on the practical applications of systems thinking. There's also the work of Dave Snowden, which he did a lot of fundamental work in this area. And a particular thing that I'm interested from Dave's work is this concept of understanding the system by dipping into it lightly and regularly. And he advocates for the use of short stories and narratives to be able to understand people's experiences with systems, to then give you insights into what your next steps might be. And so if you haven't seen the concept of using Trojan mice to release into systems to as a safe to fail way of engaging with them, to look at opportunities for changing them, that's an area where I think that we can improve our understanding and application for the reality that we find ourselves. It'll also give you lots of insights into both the challenges and frustrations that people observed about how governments have responded to COVID. An example is if you see anyone ever asking to want to know exactly what to do, just tell us exactly what to do. That's an indication that they want things to be a simple system and to deny that they're chaotic. And yeah, as one example. But the last area, which I think is a real opportunity, and this is pushing out there from the known to the unknown to the void. But I see, or I'm wrestling with the opportunity around understanding divided brain theory. So it would suggest that we've got a left and right hemisphere for a reason, and one of the fundamentals is that they provide us with two different lenses on the world. So it's very difficult to explain. And Ro, if I can ask you to put up the QR code for the divided brain. For those who are interested, a good starting point is a Royal Society of Arts presentation by Mcgillcrist on the divided brain and the implications for Western civilization. So the things that affect civilization also affect us at an agricultural level. But just to give you a really brief taste, he talks about the implications of the left-hand side of the brain, which offers us a view or a way of dealing with the world that is represented, or it's like a map of the world, which takes away the unnecessary complexity to allow us to focus and manipulate and use. So characteristics of the left view of the world is that it deals with a representation or a model. It is biased towards single solutions and it denies discrepancies. So once it's got its solution, it'll reject things that are in conflict with that. It's got an affinity for the man-made and the mechanical, and it's not concerned with feelings and people as such, but it yields a clarity. It allows us to manipulate known things and is really essential for the way that we interact with the world and use tools and do research and all of those good things. The right-hand view of the world is that it is present in the unknowable complexity of the world. So it sees many potential solutions, which can be good and can be confusing. It's got an affinity with the living, and it's a mediator of social interaction. And it yields a world that's living, changing, interconnected, but never fully knowable. And where I see this, thanks, Ro, if you want to stop sharing the screen, that'd be good. Where I see this in my work is that it explains fairly nicely an organizational or scientific approach to solving a problem, where it's about creating a map, manipulating, using, developing a man-made solution to the world that I see farmers living in, which is the real being present in the unknown complexity of climate and all the diversity around them, but having to make decisions every day about how to deal with that unknowable complexity. And I see the opportunity for extension. I actually think it's one of the key roles of extension, is to bridge those two worldviews and to constructively bring them together. And to do that requires, from my perspective, an understanding of both the strengths and weaknesses of those approaches, which to a large extent we do unconsciously. So we don't recognize that there are different ways, or that we are engaging with problems or situations in those different ways. So the terminology that they use is neural reflexivity, which just basically means that if you're aware of the way that your brain is either using shortcuts and approaches to manipulate the world or not, it can help you to be able to manage those. Just to give you a bit of a demonstration, I'd like you to think of a song that is significant to you. Okay, so you've got that song in mind. I want you to think about a couple of ways that you could represent the importance of that song. And the first way is I want you to think about writing a one-page briefing paper for the minister on why that song is important. And just think about the inadequacies of writing a couple of paragraphs to try and capture the importance. So you might say, oh, that's not a very good way of doing it. A better way could be if you could play the song for me on your iPhone and I could actually hear the song. And yeah, that could improve things a bit, but through an iPhone and that little speaker doesn't sound as nice as what you remember it, and it really doesn't convey what the song's about. So better, but still has limitations. So you might say, oh, to really understand the importance of the song, I need to play it on a decent stereo, and you can hear it clearly and hear the impact and really sort of understand that song. And yep, that's better again. But you might say, well, it sort of explains it, but it doesn't give you the context that made that song impactful and important to me. Maybe you weren't sitting there with those other 30 extension people in Jeff's seminar having to listen to Fatboy Slim and the impact that had. And you could only really understand what that song was like if you were there at the time. And that's just a bit of a demonstration of maybe transitioning from a left to right view of the one situation. And given the challenges in being able to portray complex situations, I then reflect on how many times I've asked people to communicate to me their most important issues by writing on a piece of post-it note and condensing all of that complexity down into a couple of words and expecting to understand what they're going through. And even if I do relate to what they've said, I'm immediately putting it onto a mental model that I have of that situation and filtering out anything that's relevant to them and just making it relevant to me. So this prompts me to think about opportunities of doing that engagement better. And an example would be the work that Dr. Severine Van Bommel is doing with her professional Lego kits to create rich metaphors to try and communicate complex ideas and problems. In a Christmas party either. And I would have had more awareness to know that, look, in the present, in the real world, that language and logic may not be the best thing to do, even though it convinced me to do it at the time. So you might think, well, how does that apply in the modern day? Well, I would suggest that we're still in danger of being convinced by language and logic in areas like, say, how the Drought Hub funding is distributed. There's $100 million a year going out. What's driving the decision making around that? How much of that is left brain thinking around, let's just get a logical framework to do it, and how much is actually understanding the present and the real situation that'll be going into. So the last thing that I'm just going to throw up is a QR code to a talk that I did with John James and Denise that tries to unpack this a little bit more. It's not something that they have up on their website that's readily available because it doesn't actually give you too many solutions. It raises more questions, and it's quite long, and it's struggling to get a concept out. But it is still there on YouTube. So if Ro, you throw up the last QR code, if people want to, you can go and have a look at a deeper explanation of what this divided brain theory might be telling us. And I'll just say, because there's nobody else having a look at this and it's only available to you, it's a safe place to be able to put comments in there, and it's somewhere where I can have a look and see if people are interested in having a discussion group with me about how this might be applied. If there's 4 or 5 people who put a comment down, say, yep, there's enough here to be interesting, there's an opportunity for us to be able to progress the discussion and share our learnings together. Sorry, Graham, I went 6 minutes over my target of half an hour, but I'll pull up there and open up for any questions. Ro, if you want to stop sharing that last QR code, that'd be good.
Thanks, Warwick. Great deal of information there, and some ideas and thoughts to challenge us and for us to think a little bit about, and some homework for us all to work on as well, which is always good as well. Look, I have not, admittedly, I haven't been checking the chat. I did note, however, the earthquake near New Zealand. So at the time, that was something that's unusual when you're giving a talk to have that happen, but it does happen. So I think everything's okay over there at the moment. A few other comments in there in regards to the APEN Book Club, which is coming up again in March, which we're looking forward to as well. And Jeff Coots has indicated lots to think about, and some great leads in there as well too. Look, I will throw it open to questions. Any questions that people have of Warwick or thoughts? No one jumping out?
It's Mari Vitelli. Is it
Yes,
okay?
Mari.
AgForce. Yeah, hi, Graham. Hi, Warwick. Yeah, thank you for the discussion. I suppose my AgForce role was an old extension person. I learnt through Jeff Coots and Doug Graham and co many years ago, and it's really helped me in my current policy position with a state farming organisation. We've been running, I suppose you could say, discussion groups with producers in a few areas, pasture dieback, reef policy does your head in. But I think it's a case of producers really love that discussion, and we really promote, it's a two-way discussion. It's not just one way, someone coming in and saying, this is what you need to do and this is what you need to change. There is just so much rich of information, observations and work that producers do, that some of that information needs to feed back to people that in the decision-making roles. And it does take a bit of time and trust and rapport. A lot of producers don't feel comfortable. What you found, Warwick, when you first go out, they might not be willing to say their comments verbally until they build that up. But they come in the break and say, you know, this is not the place to talk about ticks, or they'll come a little bit later and say, this is what I've observed. And they start those rich conversations outside that discussion group. But some will, in that discussion group, start to open up. And I suppose, you know, we're really trying to advocate. Don't keep talking about change. I know practice change is important, but everything in REEF is measured in change. It's not recognising what's at best practice and the learnings, the rich learnings from producers. And we're really promoting two-way discussion groups. So, you know, we've got to learn from producers. So I don't know how people feel about that, but it's a great learning I've taken on board, and really try and get those two-way conversations going in discussions. Over.
Thanks, Marie. Actually, can I just raise a question then, just in regards to discussion groups? And I'm interested in people's thoughts. We talk about how useful discussion groups are, but I'll ask the question, do all landholders want to participate in discussion groups? What about those that are not there? Put it out there.
So I'll jump in with a couple of comments because I'm on the bill. So two things that I would just add to Murray is a real learning for me was when I discovered that the majority of people coming along to discussion groups were actually coming along to reinforce their current practice and for social interaction, not to hear, well, they come along with the attitude of, oh, if I hear one good thing, then it'll be worthwhile. But the other thing was, one of the most powerful discussion groups I've been involved with was where we actually spent about the first 3 meetings working with the members of the group to develop skills in expert questioning. And that group operated by asking people to come in to address a particular problem that they could articulate. And they only wanted a short presentation, if anything, but the majority of time they wanted that person just to be there to respond to their insightful questions. And that was one of the most effective that I've had.
Oh, that's good work, and that's good observation there as well. Other thoughts around that? I'm looking for somebody else. No.
I noticed what Terry and Jeff have put in the chat, and about Terry, you've said they want to hear about silver bullets and get like maybe complexity is too much. It does depend on the type of group or the focus of the group, I think. Some of our experience with the action groups with the RMPP work was that if it was focused well and became a safe place, a safe environment to explore some things, then you could start those discussions or start to have some of those discussions. But I don't know, it takes a bit of effort and work. And I like Jeff's thinking, around being the engine. That's real cool.
Yeah, Jeff's good thinking there. I see a comment there from Noel Ainsworth just in regards to discussion groups without an outcome for the funder is still hard to get funded. Yes, it's needing the purpose, and I guess participation in groups is always interesting. Some people just don't like to participate in groups, but it depends on what you're addressing too, I think.
Graham, Nicole here. I've got a
yes, Nicole.
question/comment. So our way, so in Southwest Queensland, there used to be a whole lot of groups happening, and now there's not so much, particularly ongoing groups.
Yep. And
I think that's probably part of the problem. I'm keen to hear others' thoughts in terms of, it's a bit like when you join the executive of a committee. It's kind of like you feel like you're going to be stuck there forever because no one else wants to take on that role. And I think the ongoing groups can have part of that same feeling as well. If I join this group, I'm kind of going to be in it forever. And then so I'm keen to hear others' thoughts about the role of ongoing groups, or whether, they kind of should have, okay, we're going to form this group to discuss about this, and the group will wind up, you know, in 6 months' time or whatever, to give people that kind of certainty or assurance they're not going to be there forever.
And I think that's a good point, Nicole. And I see Aussie's made a point too, that it may vary between industries, particularly in competitive industries. And I think you're probably talking about horticulture, or it comes to mind more directly than probably any others to me. That some individuals like to keep their cards close to the chest and not actually share, be willing to participate in groups as well too. So I think there's a little bit of that too, and that can influence things. I note, for example, in the cotton industry, as a general rule, my observation has been that they tend to be a much more sharing industry than probably any others that I've seen, probably because of their smaller size to some extent, but also where they've come from a research extension background, and a relatively young industry. I guess they're at 60, 70 years now, but yeah.
Graham, John Adley here. Just to add, I suppose, to Denise's points around the action groups and what Nicole said, what we found with those action groups here in New Zealand was that some of them were relatively short-sighted in terms of, well, I suppose the view was from the board that was overseeing that program, was that those groups would continue in perpetuity. But what we often saw was that groups would actually reach that tipping point where they'd actually solve that problem, and then they would move on. Other groups saw the power of that group that was there, and often that came down to that group being well facilitated, and actually having someone actually asking those questions. So how can we as a group, as a discussion group or an action group, actually get the benefit from the power, the skills in the room? What other issues or what other challenges could we solve as a collective? So I think for me, it comes back to some of that facilitation and the skills that you've got around the table on that space.
And do you think, John, that it may also, to some extent, be about the skill sets of, I guess, driving forces within the groups as well? They differ?
Yeah, motivation can be a significant factor. So one of the things that we had here was that there was a financial incentive for farmers to be involved. And when that financial incentive disappeared, or they weren't able to access it all, some of it drifted because then they had to dig into their own pockets. So I suppose a lot of Kiwi farmers have got Scottish heritage, so found it very difficult to reach into their pockets.
A number of us still have, actually. But that's
yeah. I didn't want to draw any parallels. But
it's all good.
It comes back to motivators. So there will be financial incentives, as we know, will drive behaviour. But also equally, if you've got the right people in the room with the right motivation, that you go, hey, we've got a really good group of people here, got a really good facilitator. How can we get the best out of this? And it comes down to having that. I think some of it's that first setup and setting those rules around the group and engagement, creating that safe environment.
That's good. A question of you, Jeff, in relation to this. I'm just thinking about Chile and discussion groups in another context. How do you see them operating there, or what's the learnings from Chile?
I probably don't know enough about the ongoing discussion groups there. When I went over there, they were all one-off workshops that I was running, and I didn't hear much about discussion groups that being run. It was still very much one-on-one type of extension, which was an interesting concept where consultants and vets were paid to make so many visits to a farm each year, and that was how they made their income rather than having an extension service. So we talked about the role of discussion groups. I didn't hear much about how they were going.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that was my bad. I thought it was otherwise, but that's good. Roy.
Discussion group.
Sorry, Roy.
Groups and own care groups.
Yeah, we're not getting very good audio there, I'm afraid, Roy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, yes.
Grower groups and land care groups are examples of discussion groups, and the ones in WA in the grains industry started out quite often as land care groups and are still going as grower groups. They're supported partly, but and within them they will have discussion groups. But then they used groups for crop check, and I think you had something similar in the cotton industry, but they only lasted for a couple of years once farmers learnt the skills, and that was fine, you know. And myself as an extension officer, I used to have discussion groups of graziers in Tasmania, and after we'd been around for a while and they'd achieved what they want to achieve, you got to recognise sometimes it's time to shut them down. But also there's in the developing countries, I've done a lot of work around grower marketing groups, and getting them from supplying just the wet market to supplying higher value markets. If you do that properly, can really create a long-term benefit. But not all groups succeed. Yeah. The best ones succeed when they have start out with a lot of social capital.
Good point, Roy. Good point.
Graham, sorry, I was just going to say in response to John's comment, it's interesting within dairy, we find some of our longest lasting groups are actually the ones that have any financial investment. So the businesses are there, often they're business benchmarking groups, and they're financially investing in the consultant or facilitator. And we've had some that have been going sort of 20 to 30 years, and they're sort of driven by that, you know, the business piece, but they're also learning from one another. But they are financially investing, as opposed to Dairy Australia being the one providing the support or a bit of funding. So it is interesting that, you know, sometimes when there's a financial incentive, people take it or leave it. When they're putting their own money on the table, they're going to get their money's worth.
It's a good comment, Sarah.
I think it was a good point Roy made there too, that, and I think it's been made elsewhere, that sometimes groups need to be formed to address a particular issue. Once that issue is dealt with, then it's not necessarily a bad thing for them to move on. So Warwick, we probably do. Have we got any more questions? Sorry, before we pull it to a close. I'm just looking at the time frame here. We've gone to 50 minutes now, so I'll just Warwick, have you got one more thing that you wanted to add before we thank you for your presentation and thought and new links?
Look, just to say, if there's any interest in those opportunities, to please email me, and I'm happy to follow that up with you.
Okay, and I noticed Jeff's just put a comment in here about a New Zealand study tour to Argentina to visit those groups. So Terry is not sure. Okay, that's all right. Look, I would like everyone to, on behalf of everyone, to thank Warwick. Again, congratulations on the receiving the joint award with Denise, who is here also. And she won't escape either, no doubt. We look forward to future webinars. I think the opportunity is there from what Warwick has indicated, that maybe this can continue on with us making contact with Warwick and thinking a little bit about continuing to develop our profession and extension, because really that is what APEN is about. Continuing to support new extensionists, support our existing extensionists, and ensuring that the profession of extension continues to develop in this country and in other countries as well, countries being the broad country within the Asia-Pacific region.